Hello everybody. In today's video, I'm going to be walking you guys through how to edit an image that I took a couple weeks ago. And I actually posted a video in the field of me shooting this image last weekend. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to go ahead and link it right here so that you can go watch that first. If you're interested in seeing how I captured this in the field, it's a really cool video. It was really stormy, really windy, and it was just really crazy conditions out there. So definitely check it out and then come back and watch this video. This video just covers how I edit that image. I'm going to be editing it in Lightroom, so I'm going to be talking you guys through that whole process. I'm going to be talking you through some global adjustments and then some tips and tricks on what I like doing with some local adjustments to adjust lightning and storm images like this one that you will be seeing me edit. So we're going to hop right into Lightroom and start editing right after this. So as you can see here, I've got my image open in Lightroom. Now I had previously pulled this into Photoshop just to blend a foreground exposure with a background exposure so we could have trees that were sharp and not moving. But that's pretty much all that I've done here. You can see the image is looking pretty lifeless, not a whole lot of color going on. So we're gonna bring all of that back, and I'm gonna show you guys a few tips and tricks that I like to use in Lightroom to bring all of that back. So the first thing that I wanna do is go down here into the detail tab. This is always my first step when I'm editing photos. And I might want to do Command plus or Control plus if you're on a PC and just zoom in. I want to do a little bit of sharpening here. Now to sharpen this image, the first thing that I want to do is go ahead and increase the sharpening, obviously. I'm going to increase it all the way. We are going to dial it back in just a second here, but I'm going to show you why we increase it all the way. And we want to increase the detail all the way and drop the radius as low as possible. And then we're going to use the masking feature. So if I hold Alt Option, I can drag this masking, and anything that's white is going to be sharpened. Anything that's black is not going to be sharpened. So you can see with the masking at 0, everything's being sharpened. And then as we continue to slide, we mask out some of those spots like the sky that we wouldn't want sharpened. Right about in there is probably going to be good for me. You can always click and zoom back out and then again hit Alt Option and drag the masking, and that looks about right. I want the trees to be sharpened, a little bit of the foreground, and the lightning can be sharpened. It's just fine for me. I'm going to zoom back in though because the amount at 150 is way too high. And one giveaway, you can see we've created some noise on the edge here. We don't want that, so we just want to reduce this until we feel like it's in a good spot. And you can hit this little rectangle up here to toggle on and off. And I'm really liking what that's doing. You can see that really brings out the lightning quite a bit here, pops it from the background. So I'm really liking that. So now we can go ahead and close the detail tab, and we can go back up and begin making some basic adjustments. So first off, I'm going to add a little bit of contrast. We're going to reduce the highlights. We're going to increase the shadows. We're going to increase the whites. We're going to increase the blacks. We're going to add a touch of texture, a touch of clarity, and perhaps a little bit of vibrance to kind of bring out the sky a little bit. Now, the first thing that I'm noticing is that this image could actually use a little bit of color grading, and I don't normally do a lot of color grading, formerly known as split toning in Lightroom, but for this image, I really think it's going to be beneficial. The first thing is the shadows. As you can see, kind of the shadows and foreground in our image is pretty blue, and I was out here, these rocks were really red and orange, so I want them to be a little bit more toned that direction. So what I can do is go ahead and drag this over here to the oranges, and then I can click and drag this circle. Now a little tip for you if you're using color grading, if you hold shift, you can see you've got this straight line, which makes it a lot easier to drag out when you're doing this. Now you can see that we're affecting a lot of the image because a lot of the sky is also considered shadows. But what we can do is actually go down here to balance, and we can adjust the balance. And that's gonna basically make it more selective to only get those really, really deep, dark shadows. And I'll toggle that on and off. You can see that we've already toned this really nicely. Now I'm also gonna go into the highlights and kick in a little bit of blues. And by doing that, oops, and I wanna hold shift. By doing that, I'm going to kind of tone the sky a little bit. Somewhere about right in there. You can adjust the blending if you'd like to. I generally leave it around 50, but sometimes I'll adjust it one way or another just to see kind of what it does. And I'll toggle that off and on. And you can see now that it's very, very subtle. I'll show you one more time. That is before and this is after. You can see it's super subtle, but what we've done is kind of created a little bit of a two-tone where we've got this orangish red rock in the foreground and this blue stormy sky in the background. After I do this, a lot of times I'll come back up and adjust the temperature and the tint. Perhaps I think this image should be slightly warmed up and maybe a little bit towards green. It's looking pretty good to me. Okay, so now let's go ahead and go in. I'm going to add a little bit of saturation into the image here. I think that's looking pretty good. And now I'm going to go ahead and make some refined adjustments to this rock. I can actually go into hue here, and I want to change the hue of this rock to be a little more red and a little less magenta. So as I drag this over here, you can see how we are changing the color of the rock in the foreground. I actually just want to drag the magenta almost all the way to red, all the way over here. And I don't like going all the way to 100 because a lot of times that can create a little bit of color banding, which is not something you want in your image. So I'm going to put it right there, and that looks pretty good to me. Now I can also go in, I can try and adjust the reds and see if that does anything. You can see it does a little bit, but not a whole lot. Let's just move it a little bit towards orange. Now let's increase the saturation of the reds, increase the saturation of the oranges just a bit, and we'll even increase the saturation of the magentas, not too much because I got to be really careful of what's going on up here with the purple and magenta. And while we're on that point, I actually might want to go into the luminance and increase the luminance of the purples and the magentas. And not only does that brighten these spots up here around the lightning, that also in turn will decrease the saturation slightly, which is fine with me because I don't want all of that purple up there in the sky. So that's looking pretty good. I also might go into the blues, and I might pop the blues. And let's also go in, one thing that I'm noticing on this image is you've got this like purplish sky over here and this bluish sky over here. So what we can do is actually drag the purples towards the blue and the blue towards the purple to kind of give it a little bit more of a uniform look. And I want it to be more like that blue, so I'm going to bring the purple a lot more towards blue than I will bring the blue towards the purple. And let's just toggle this to see all of our color changes. Super subtle, super subtle, but I can't stress enough how important these little changes are in your image. Now, the next thing that I want to do, I'm going to close this down for now, is I'm going to show you how to make a couple of refined local adjustments. Now, the first local adjustment I want to make is I noticed that this rock is a lot more saturated and it appears a lot brighter than the rest of the foreground. So I kind of want to match that up a little bit. I'm going to grab this radial filter to do that, and I'm just going to draw a circle on the image with a good selection of this rock. Now, if I go ahead and adjust this, I'm going to reset that back to 0. I'm going to reduce the shadows to match, and I'm going to reduce the saturation to match the rest of my foreground. And let's see how this is looking. All right, it's looking pretty good. So one thing that I want to do to make sure I'm not affecting outside of this circle is actually use what's called a range mask. And I'm going to use the range mask based on color, I think. We'll try color and see how that looks. So when you use color, you're going to go ahead and hit the eyedropper tool and click on your image. And now we can show selected mask overlay. Now this is showing me what is being selected. Anything red is going to be selected. Anything that's not red is not selected. So as you can see now, even though we have this huge circle, it's only selecting this rock inside, which is exactly what I wanted. We can even adjust the amount to make it more or less selective. I'm going to increase the amount as high as possible without getting the sky in the image. Right about in there looks good. Now I can go ahead and click this again to hide the mask overlay. And then I can toggle this on and off. You can see how we've only selected that rock, which is exactly what we wanted to do. So I am really happy with how that's looking right there. Now the next thing I want to do is I'm going to grab a little gradient here, and I'm actually going to make some adjustments to the sky. So I'm going to click and drag. And now how a gradient works, if you haven't used one before, is anything above this top line is going to be 100% selected. I'll actually show the mask overlay here so you can see it. Anything between this line and the end here is going to be anywhere between 0 and 100% selected. So you can see how it feathers out. So the further you drag this line down, the more feathered it's going to be. So that is how you go about using a gradient mask. I'm not too concerned about making it really feathered because we're actually going to be using a luminance mask for this one. Now, the luminance mask is really cool because we can actually do it based on luminance values rather than on colors. So I checked to show the luminance mask, and I'm going to change the range here. Now, I want to select just the brightest spots in the sky. So remember, anything that's red is selected, anything that's not red is not being selected. Somewhere about 75 looks good to me, and then I can adjust the smoothness to affect more or less and to affect certain spots. I think that's looking good right there. Let's uncheck Show Luminance Mask, and then we can go back. We're going to reduce the clarity again. You always have to reset it, which is really annoying, but it is what it is. Now I can adjust this. So you can see really cool way to just select those brights. I did it in, that was probably 30 seconds, I'm guessing. So really nice way to select those spots quickly. And just kind of clicking around here, seeing what I like. Also, another thing that I like to do is sometimes I'll adjust the smoothness after I make my adjustments and just see what the smoothness does. Somewhere about in there is looking good to me. I can toggle that off and back on. And I might actually reduce this just a little bit. The effect is coming on pretty strong. Right about in there is looking good to me. Now I want to do the same thing, but to adjust the dark clouds. So how I'm going to do that is actually by hitting Control and clicking, and I'm going to hit Duplicate. I'm going to move this over just slightly so I have a different handle and different spot to select it. Now this time I'm going to show the luminance mask, and I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to select the dark areas. And you may have to drag this off the bottom so that you are not selecting those foreground areas. Probably somewhere about in there is good for me. And let's go ahead and uncheck that so we can see our image. And let's reduce that to 0 again. Reduce this to 0, and let's bring down the shadows. Maybe we'll bring down the exposure as well. I don't want to bring it down too terribly much. And let's toggle that. So when we toggle this, it's going to show both of our gradient adjustments at once. And one thing you have to be careful of is we are also affecting this rock here. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this. It was worth a try. These are things that I'm doing all the time on my images, just trying something, seeing if it works. In that case, it didn't work, so I'm not too concerned about it. So I want to go in now with the brush tool. And the next thing that I'm noticing is that the color here in these dark gray clouds doesn't really match the blues. So I want to see if I can affect that at all by going in here, and I'm going to zero this out. And I've got my brush tool, and I'm just going to paint over this one area. And when I click and drag, you can see when I hover over this now, I can see the area that I've painted on. And this time I'm actually going to use a color mask, I believe. Let's give this a try. We'll click here, and we will show the selected mask overlay once again. Now you can see it's doing a really nice job of selecting just those gray clouds. Now I'm going to uncheck this, and we can actually go in, hit color, and we can hit blue. So it's looking way too blue at the moment. We can actually reduce the saturation quite a bit here. And we are just going to try and somewhat match this up. And I might even go a little bit this direction. You can see sometimes it's a little bit slow to load, but I just kind of want to match it with the rest of the sky to kind of make it all blend together a little bit. So I'm actually going to go back. I'm going to drop this tool, and now I'll have the brush again. And I want to just do a little more painting in right there. Let's toggle this. Okay, so you can see that is looking a little bit better there. Now it appears more like this is all one tone and it's not a weirdly colored gray cloud. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave that as it is. I'm only doing this just to kind of make the image flow a little bit better, to kind of make all those colors blend together just slightly a little bit more. So that is looking really good. You could even do it one more time in here. You could add a little bit of blues. I will show you how to do that really quickly. I'm just gonna hit new. And I'm gonna go in with my brush tool right up in here. Again, I'm gonna go to color, I'm going to hit my eyedropper tool, going to select this gray color. I'm gonna hit show selected mask overlay. And I'm gonna reduce the amount to make that a little bit more selective. And right about in there looks good. Again, we're gonna hit color and we are going to add some blues. Remember to uncheck show selected mask overlay. And now you can see we're gonna have to reduce the saturation quite a bit here. Probably somewhere about in there. So I'll drop this tool and I'll show you guys exactly what we've done there. I'm gonna delete that. You can see that this here is the before and this is the after. So again, super subtle changes. I might even reduce the saturation even more. But the point is, these super subtle changes are nice because they help me bring my whole sky together as a whole. You can see if I toggle those two color adjustments I just made, and then I put it back on, you can see that we've kind of made the image look like it belongs a little bit more together, because we had these really dark gray clouds and then these really saturated clouds that didn't go well together. Now they are looking quite good. So I want to go ahead and make just a couple other adjustments here. The first thing that I want to do, I want to hit new, and I want to reduce the brightness of this spot. For some reason, I feel like this right in here is just so much brighter than everywhere else on the foreground. To do that, I'm just going to drop the exposure just a tiny bit. I'm going to increase my feather, and I'm going to go in with my brush and just hit these areas. Now we can adjust the exposure, but you'll see that if we do it too much, it's going to look really unrealistic. So I just want to lower it just a tiny bit. And that looks a lot better to me. These local adjustments in Lightroom are really great for making your image blend together as a whole, but it's really similar to dodging and burning in Photoshop, is pretty much exactly what I'm doing here. So this is starting to look really nice. Now, the other thing that I think I want to do is I want to kind of bring out more of this color in the foreground. So the best way for me to do that is probably going to be using the brush tool once again. I'm going to hit new. This time I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and I'm going to reduce the feather, and let's just paint this whole foreground area just like that. Now you can see I have very easily just hit the whole foreground. Once this mask loads out here, it will show you in red what I've selected. You can see I've done a pretty good job. I just want to make sure I get that corner. Okay, so now what I want to do is use a range mask for color once again. I want to select the color of the foreground rock here, and then I want to reduce the amount. So you can see just like that, we've made a good selection of our foreground here, and we're not selecting the trees, which is good. Or we're not selecting the trees too much, and we're not selecting too much sky. Now I can go ahead and hide this. We can drop that tool back in there, and now we can go ahead and make an adjustment. So first of all, I want to increase the saturation, I believe. It's not going to do a whole lot because there's not that much saturation to begin with, but the really nice thing here is, once again, I can add color, and I'm going to add orange, and I always like to start too saturated, and then you can dial it back. Now you can see we've added a little bit of orange in there. That's actually looking really nice, I think. It's kind of adding a little bit more of that color back in. And that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and adjust this amount down here and just kind of play with this to see what it's doing. Now you can see when I increase the amount too much, it starts to affect the sky. And I don't want that to happen. So I want to bring this down so we're not touching the sky. I think in there looks good. And oh, I want to make sure that I zero out that exposure. We definitely don't want that to be on, but we can go in and add a little bit of contrast perhaps. And we can even kick in some whites, which is going to help that pop a little bit better. Maybe I'll reduce the shadows to add a little bit of punch to it. I mean, the possibilities are endless here. You can pretty much do anything you want. I'm liking how that's looking right now, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that as is. So the last little thing that I want to do here is adjust the lightning. So I'm going to use the brush mask to paint over the lightning, and I'm going to go ahead and use a color range mask on this one. And I might have to zoom in by hitting Command plus a couple times and scrolling up here on the image because I want to make a good selection of the lightning. And I'm going to click right on the edge there. And let's go ahead and show the selected mask overlay just so that we can see a little bit better. And let's reduce the amount. All right, so we can slowly bring it up from 0 and start to see. All right about there, I would say, is making a good selection where we're not selecting too much of what's around. You can also hold the shift bar to add another color. So if I wanted to maybe try and select this lightning too, I could shift and click there and that would add another color. You can see that I actually don't like what that's done, so always be aware of what it's doing. Remember, the more red, the more you have selected. Let's actually zoom back out by hitting Command minus. And we are going to make sure that this is not lowering the exposure because that is actually pretty much the opposite of what we want to do. I'm going to hide the show selected mask overlay so that I can see the image for what it is and make those adjustments. Now I can try bringing up the exposure. You can see that we can really crank the lightning here. And sometimes it takes a second to load out. I'm going to toggle this. And this is going to toggle all the adjustments that I've made, but I'm just looking at the lightning up here. And I think it's looking really nice. We've brightened that bolt, which is exactly what I wanted to do. It's looking great to me. The last thing maybe that I would want to do is reduce. There seems to be like a purple spot here, which I know is because that lightning gave out that color, but I don't really like it too much in my image. So I'm actually going to go ahead and hit new. I'm going to go in here and we're going to use the brush tool again, hit this same spot just like that. And we are going to use a color mask. We are going to select this spot on the purple here. And I think what we're going to do is just reduce the saturation a bit. And let's also increase the highlights to kind of pop it even more. So we'll do a little bit of both. Nice. And you can see how that's starting to really kind of electrify the image, so to speak. The last thing that I want to do to this image is just add a nice little vignette. So I'm pretty happy with how the lightning looks. I'm pretty happy with how everything else looks. Just want to go ahead and add a little vignette. That's going to be down here in Effects. So I'm going to go back to Effects. I'm going to go over and I'm going to slide this to the left to throw that vignette on my image. Now I can go ahead and feather this a little bit more if I wanted to. I can keep the highlights, which is usually a good thing because I don't want to dull down those highlights. I'm going to bring that up to about 75. And let's actually increase the midpoint here. So a vignette it's always nice to adjust all of these settings. Usually roundness is the only one that I don't play with, but I will play with the rest of the settings to see exactly what I like. That's looking pretty good. Now, on a lot of my photos, I'll actually create a center brightening spot as well, which is really easy to do with this radial filter. You can just click from the center and drag. You can do this after you create your vignette, and this does exactly the opposite of a vignette. So this brightens the middle rather than darkens the edges. So this is a really nice thing to have. You can just add about a half a stop or less of exposure into the middle of your image. You can even add some contrast and some clarity as well. And I think that's looking good. Let's toggle that. and after. Nice. Well, that is looking really good. So I'm really, really happy with this. This is looking great. So that wraps up how I would go about editing this image in Lightroom. Alrighty, everybody. I really hope you enjoyed this kind of two-part series of in the field and post-processing. I hope it was helpful for you to see my whole process start to finish, from field to final edit. So if you do like this style of video and the kind of two-part series, let me know. I'd love to make more of these in the future. I'm sure I will, but let me know what you guys think about them. If there's anything I can do a little bit better, a little more different to make them more interesting or more helpful to you, I would definitely love to do that. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe. Comment if you have any questions or feedback for the video. Thank you guys so much, as always, for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.